But yes, I end up with a chapter by chapter outline. And when I have the chapter by chapter outline, I book a 1 hour call with editor Jess and I go through that with her. And I do that to try to reduce I hate developmental edit changes. I hate making them. I hate making them more than it's my most hated part of the writing process. Because like you think, oh, I've written the story and I've got it all down. My brain goes, oh, I'm done with that. Thank you very much. And then you get your developmental edit back. And it's like, well, this needs changing. This chapter needs moving there. This person needs, and I'm like, oh my God, I just don't want to do it. So to try to limit that as much as I can, I thought, well, rather than just writing this whole thing out and then giving the whole book to Jess to say, tell me what's wrong with it. If I outline it and go through the outline with her before I start to write it, we can fix some of those things before I've ever written it.
Welcome to Raising Baby Authors. I'm Cassia, your host and a brand new writer. If you feel overwhelmed and lost about this whole writing thing, you're certainly not alone. Join me while I pester my author guests for writing advice and find out how they do it. Because if they could, then why not you? It truly takes a village to raise an author, so let me share my village with you. Hello, dear listener. Finally, we're doing this after 6 months of me planning, obsessing over it, finding authors. I am so honored that you are giving me your time and your attention wherever you are, whether you're on commute or at home doing chores. I will do my best to teach you something or at least to entertain you. So let me introduce you to our first mentor. Honestly, there wasn't even a question who's going to be the first author on this podcast. There was always only one candidate because as soon as I told her about the idea of making this podcast, she has been my personal cheerleader in everything. And I have learned a lot from this author, and it's really criminal that I'm the only one that's benefiting from all the knowledge and all the advice. Nicky Redford writes spicy rom-coms to make you laugh, swoon, and need to sit on an ice pack. She loves heroes who think they know what they want. They're wrong, obviously. The feisty independent heroines who don't take their crap, and the dynamite banter that inevitably ensues. Throw in a Sparky senior and a meddling relative, and she's in heaven. Nicky is originally British, has lived in Canada for almost 20 years, and writes stories set in the United States. So at this point, she's completely lost track of which words have a U in them. That's funny. Welcome, Nicky.
Thank the Lord for editors. Hi, and thank the Lord for editors because of those U's. Yeah.
So which words are we talking about?
So like color and favor and all those words
in
the US don't have a U, but in the UK they do. And in Canada, some of them do and some of them don't. So my head's just a big mush of U's at this point. So. But thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for agreeing to talk to me. Well, first of all, let's start with you, because I have a couple of questions from our listeners, from my followers on Instagram, and they are related to your books. You have released 6 books so far, right?
Yep, 6. So I still feel like a very baby author. I feel grossly underqualified to give anyone any advice. But yes, 6 books. I just started publishing in September of 2023. But I spent 4 years before that writing these 6 books and cramming my head with as much knowledge as possible. But yes, the 6th book in that series came out in June of 2024. So that's where we're at this point with that series.
Wow, it's still like 6 books in under a year. Well, publishing in under a year.
Yes, they were written before that. That wasn't the intention, but we can talk about that later if you like.
Of course. And in relation to those books, I had a question from the reader. So the books are centered around 6 brothers, billionaire brothers or cousins. And so the question was, how did the idea came to you about the 6 billionaire brothers?
Well, I knew I wanted to write a series, and I knew I wanted them to be interconnected standalones because that's what I really enjoy. I really enjoy when you get the next book in the series and characters from the other books are popping in, and I just love that feeling. You feel like you're part of a little world, and I love that. So I knew that was what I wanted to do, and I knew I wanted to write about rich guys But I didn't want those rich guys to be like the sort of always been rich a-holes. I wanted them to be self-made men who came from nothing, and I wanted them to be related to each other. And then I thought, well, if I did 5 brothers or 6 brothers, then there's an awful lot of families in the romance world that are 6 brothers or six,
Yep.
are related. They're large families, and I thought, how about I split them up? I started with 5 of them to begin with. So I started with 3 brothers and 2 cousins. So a set of 3 brothers and a set of 2 brothers. But I wanted them to have been raised together so that they were almost like brothers all together. So 2 of the brothers lost their parents when, I mean, like they died. They weren't like really careless. Their parents died, and so they were taken in by the other family, and so the 5 of them were all raised together, even though 3 of them are brothers and 2 of them are cousins. So they call each other bruzins because they're brother-like cousins,
Right.
which I can't convince my editor who came up with that term in a meeting. And she was like, oh, you should call them bruzins. They should call each other bruzins. And I was like, great. So I can't claim that one. That was all her idea. So I had those 5. And then I was going to write a freebie series starter to give away, like a novella. So I pulled in a cousin from the West Coast in California to do a prequel novella. And then by the time I'd written that and it had been through editing, it ended up as, I can't remember how many words that stranded feeling is. I think it's maybe 75 or something. Anyway, my editor at the end said, and I quote her, that's a whole ass novel. You can't give that away. So that became book 1 and I ended up with 6.
Yeah. I mean, I'm also an overwriter, so it happens. Yeah, it happens. But it came out great eventually. So now you have the whole 6 books in
Yeah.
your arsenal. So that's amazing. And actually, the same reader had another question for you. If you had to choose, which couple would be your favorite, and which couple was the hardest to write?
Gosh, which couple is my favorite is really difficult because they're all probably all favorites for different reasons. So Polly and Max in That Conflicted Feeling were the first characters I ever came up with.
Mhm.
So I love them and they're my favorites for that reason. And I love like opposites attract and enemies to lovers. I love it, love it, love it. So they're my favorites for that reason. Walker and Emily in That Friend Zone Feeling, they're favorites because they were the first characters I wrote where I really felt that they were real people in my life that I could go out and have a drink with.
Right.
And I love them for that reason. But also like Hannah and Tom in That Reunited Feeling, I feel like that with them too. So yeah, although now I feel like just the handful I've left out I don't like, which is not true. I love them all. So it's hard. That's a really tough one to answer. So I like, well, I love all of them, but the ones rise to the top for slightly different reasons, which is the hardest one to write. Um, there's 2 of them. That Fake Feeling, which is Connor and Rose. I struggled with writing about 3 of the chapters in that book. I knew what needed to happen and I just didn't know how to do it. And I actually cried at my keyboard. Like, I don't know how to write this, but I'm just going to write some words and I'll sort it out afterwards, but I don't know what I'm doing. So that was hard because of that. And That Geeky Feeling with Elliot and Charlotte, I had COVID.
Oh
So
my
I
God.
literally and I just moved house. I just moved into the place that I'm sitting in right now. All my furniture was still wrapped up. And I had, my routine, which we might get to, is when I'm drafting a book, I do a chapter a day.
Mhm.
And I thought that's okay because while I'm moving and unpacking and stuff, I'd taken a couple of weeks off work to do with that. I can squeeze in a chapter a day. It's fine. But then I got COVID. And so I could do one thing. I could either unpack or I could get out a chapter a day. And this sofa behind me was literally on the floor on its back with bubble wrap around it. And I was like typing a few words and then like lying on the sofa for a bit. And I typing. So that was physically hard. I literally dragged myself through that book and then fixed it up when I was feeling better afterwards. Yeah, and then That Fake Feeling, I cried during 3 chapters because I just had no idea how to write them.
Wow. I mean, it's incredible to hear that about that geeky feeling because I mean, I don't know if you know, but it's one of the 2 of my favorites that are behind me right now.
Yeah.
It came out amazing, and to know that you were writing it while having COVID and probably your brain was all fuzzy and it was, yeah, Amazing.
Yeah, well, that's very sweet. But after it had been through the first couple of round of edits, I did quite a. I went back through it and added a whole bunch of stuff that sort of lifted it, I think, a little. So yeah, it's
All
all in the
right.
edit, as they say.
Yeah, yeah, probably that's true. I didn't have an edit yet, but I believe that it's gonna get better in the
Yeah.
edits. This is my form of religion.
Yes.
Well, well, thank you, and thank you, Bobby, for asking the questions.
Yay, Bobby.
Uh, So, well, yeah, I think something that I will ask every writer and every author here is basically we already touched on it a little bit that you've been writing for 4 years before you started publishing. But yeah, how did you get into writing? How did you decide to finally start writing these books?
Yeah, so that's kind of a long story. Well, in the UK. I was a journalist for 15 years. I was a radio journalist for 15 years. And I'd always sort of thought that I was in that job. And I initially got into that job because I loved radio and I wanted to work in broadcasting. And I was like, well, and I like news, so maybe that's my way in. So I always thought that was the reason I was there, because I loved radio and I loved broadcasting. But then when I left the job to move to Canada to have an adventure, and I realized at that point, when I started missing the job, I realized the part of the job I was missing was the writing. And what I was reading at the time, that was all the era of that was the heyday of chick lit, right? So that was Bridget Jones and Shopaholic, and that was what I was reading and enjoying. And I thought, oh, I wonder if I could. And I came across this book. Well, I'd always thought, I wondered if I could, and believed I absolutely couldn't. That was what I thought. No, that would be amazing, but obviously I can't. And I came across a book. I actually have it here because I thought this might come up. It's called Will Write for Shoes, written by Kathy Yardley. So this is an old book. You see how yellow the pages are?
Oh,
So
yeah.
this came out in, let me see when this came out now. 2006, this came out.
Okay.
She has updated it. It's not even called this anymore. And it's not about, this is basically how to write a chick lit novel, which isn't really that much of a thing. Or at least people don't really call it that anymore, thank goodness. And so I came across this book, and in this book, she explains about characters, their goals, motivations, and conflicts, the keys to developing a character. And she also goes through how each chapter needs to have a goal, motivation, and a conflict. And she also, the key that I found in this book that made me believe that maybe I could do it was she basically maths out the book. So it's like at 25% of your book, this needs to happen. At 33%, this needs to happen. At 50%, this needs to happen. At 66%, this needs to happen. At 75%, this needs to happen. And then you wrap it up like this at the end. And I was like, oh my God, with math there, maybe I could do it. So I had a go, and I wrote what was essentially a chick lit novel with romance in it. And I queried that. I thought, because I figured, when was this? I think this was probably 2011, 2012 maybe. And I just believed stupidly that there was the self-publishing, there was no money in it. It was just pennies and and so I thought querying it is the only way to go. So I wrote the book and I sent it off to 13 agents in London, and they were all big. They were big, like blue sky, top-notch dream agents. I sent it off to them, and the replies, I think either two or three of them were what I think were personalized rejections. Obviously they were all rejections. I think two or three of them were personalized. I'm not totally sure. Maybe I was convincing myself they were personalized and actually they were just what they sent to everybody. But anyway, so I did that, and then life took over, and then that book is still sitting on a hard drive somewhere. But then that was when I lived on the west coast of Canada. Then when I moved to Toronto and I had a bit more time in my life, I was like, you know what? I always wanted to write. I'm going to just damn well do this. And so I took a writing class. There's some excellent universities in Toronto, and one of them has a great continuing education program, and they have a few writing classes taught by their working excellent Canadian authors. And I took one of those. I took a short story writing class because I thought that would give me the chance to try out more different stories, as opposed to take a novel writing class and then you're stuck into that one thing. Right. And while I was my intention was to write and query when I took that class. But while I was in that class, I thought, the way I work when I'm sort of getting into something is I need to completely submerge myself in it. So I'm going to read books about craft, and I'm going to listen to every podcast I can about writing craft. And so I subscribed to a billion writing podcasts. And so the podcast algorithm at some point showed me the Self-Publishing Formula podcast. And I was like, what's that? That sounds like a load of old rubbish, right? So anyway, then I looked up the guy whose name was on it, and he was like an actual mega best-selling author. I was like, oh, maybe there's something to this. So I started listening to the Self-Publishing Formula podcast. I think it's called Learn Self-Publishing now. They changed the name. I went back to the beginning and I listened to every single one. And I was like, oh my God, you can actually not just make a living at this, but you can make a great living at it. And I didn't even realize that's what I need to do. And I completely switched my focus then to self-publishing. And that's a very long answer to your question. And I'll stop talking now.
So you've decided to self-publish, and then you started writing the series, or you were already in the middle?
Yeah, so I was just trying things out in that writing class because I didn't really know. So I knew that I still wanted to write this sort of romance novels was what I wanted to write, because ultimately I always wanted to make a living at it. And not only was that what I read, so it was what I knew and what I enjoyed. That's also the biggest selling genre in the world is romance.
Right.
Whilst it's very saturated, it's also sort of the thing that people buy the most. So I was not writing novels at that point. I knew I wanted to write novels, but during the class, what I was doing is every assignment we got given, I would twist it to that genre.
Okay. And so you've decided that first you will write multiple books and then you will try publishing them?
No, I never decided that. My goal was to publish as I wrote. What happened was, so I wrote the first one, and I wrote the first draft of the first one, and I got an editor, and she looked over it, and I was like, well, maybe that's not very good. I knew that I never wanted to put up a pre-order till I had a book that was ready.
Right.
Because that's just too frightening. And I still don't do that now. Maybe someday I'll be confident enough to know, and time is not now. I had a dream editor in mind, and I had to wait for her. It's an editor who I found the way I found my editor, which is something some people wonder, how do you find an editor? I found mine by looking in. I found the authors whose career paths I wanted to emulate, whose success I wanted to emulate, who were my hero authors, and I looked to see who their editors were. And there was one person that was in common with a couple of my real dream author heroines. And I was like, I wonder if she'd take me. I wrote the first novel in over 2019. So that Stranded Feeling, what turned out to be the first book, which was going to be my freebie. I wrote that I think I started writing that at the end of 2019. So into 2020, I'd sent it off to one editor. It came back, and I made some of those changes. And then I thought, I need to be brave. I need to ask this dream editor. I need to ask. She's only going to say no. It's fine. And I can just move on. So I approached her in May of 2020. I only know this because I was talking to her about it the other day. And she said, oh, let me look back, because I couldn't remember when it was. And so it was May of 2020, but she didn't have an opening until October. So it's fine. It's totally fine, right? I'll wait. Totally fine.
That sounds totally legit from what I'm seeing from other editors.
I was a complete stranger, right? She's like, no reason to take me on at all. So I did that, and I got my edit that same book. In the meantime, I started writing the second book. So I started writing that Conflicted Feeling, because I had that Stranded Feeling sort of on the shelf. I dealt with the edits from the first editor that I'd sent it to, and while I was waiting to send that off to editor Jess, hence my dream editor, I started writing that Conflicted Feeling. And once she'd done the edit on that, we'd spoken. I loved the way she dealt with it. I loved the way she dealt with me. I loved her. I was like, okay, can I just book all my edits for next year now, please? Because I was frightened of losing her, right? I was just like, she's amazing and she's happy to take me on, and I need to clutch onto her with my cold dead hands and never let her go.
Exactly.
So I was like, because she's in demand, I wanted to make sure that I had all my edits for the following year. So I booked all my so she does my developmental editing and my line editing, and then she contracts out my copy editing to a copy editor on her team. So I booked my line and developmental edits for 3 books for the next year, which was 2021. So while what I then realized, while I was hitting all those edits that I booked, I had no time to do anything else other than hit those editing targets. That was why I ended up, it was purely practical, was why I didn't publish until they were all written, because I literally got myself into a cycle. I booked those edit points, those edit slots, and I needed to hit them. And all I had time in my life to do was hit those editing targets. I couldn't deal with learning the publishing
Oh, I
or getting, yeah.
see.
So that
That
was
was
why.
the reason. Okay,
Completely
interesting.
accidental, and but turned out to be a great accident, because by the time I'd written 6 books, I'd written 6 books, and I'd written the first book of the next series, which isn't out till January 2025. I'd written that as well, and I was like, okay, I need to start publishing now. So I went back. So I'd written 7 publishable novels, and I went back, and then I read through all the books again, and I tweaked them all. So That Stranded Feeling is a much better book now than it would have been if I'd put it out when it was initially ready.
Okay, that is what actually is kind of bothering me about having a series and publishing the first book before you like finish the second one or the third one or however many you have planned, because then maybe what if you're in the fourth one and then you suddenly realize something that could be put in the first one and it would be so amazing, but it's already out and it's impossible. And I think this just sends me into like this stress cycle that I'm like, no, if I'm writing series, I'm writing series and I'm finishing it, and only then I'm starting to publish them. I mean, I'm
That's
talking about it
great.
as if I have any series, but like, yeah,
No, but you will have.
the first thing I planned was a series. I kind of stepped away from it now, but still, like what I'm thinking is I will need to write those 3.5 books that I've planned first, maybe edit them, whatever, but no publishing before I know how everything turns out. Yeah,
Yeah,
no,
it
that's
was it was it was helpful from that regard, as in I was able to just like sow some seeds for later on that I wouldn't have been
right.
there otherwise. But also my writing was a lot better 7 books on, and I just knew the rhythm more of how it should go. So when I was going back reading through That Stranded Feeling, I was like, oh well, this needs a sentence here that says blah 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 blah, and so then I could edit because I was just more in the rhythm of how a story should. I know we're using the word should is a terrible thing, but how a story sort of should go, and how I had ended up writing my other stories, and yeah, sort of
Hmm.
adapting it a little along the way. So yeah,
Wow.
yeah, but I had 6 books sitting on my hard drive earning me no money for 4 years. Well, they weren't all 6 there for 4 years. So that's the downside to it. You know, if I had started publishing in 2020 when the market wasn't as saturated, would I be in a better position in terms of career and finance? Maybe. But I also know for sure now that I wouldn't be as happy with That Stranded Feeling and that conflicted
Hmm.
feeling as I am now. So
Yeah, that's
it's the
true.
balance thing, right? So
Yeah, another thing I wanted to ask you actually regarding accountability. There was one question about you like writing every day is what I'm seeing on Instagram, for example. But now I'm hearing that you had deadlines for yourself with the editor, 3 books in 1 year to edit. So did you know beforehand that you will be able to actually have 3 books for her to edit? You're like,
mm,
or you were just like, oh, how many books do you think I can? Maybe 3 would be okay. I mean, I can't even imagine writing 3 books in 1 year.
yeah, so because I'd written That Stranded Feeling and I was already writing That Conflicted Feeling, what I'd realized was that I can write a chapter a day.
Okay.
So in the first draft, that is.
Hmm.
So I figured if I can write a first draft in 30 days, although I always end up with like more than 30 chapters now. But anyway, I always think, oh, a chapter a day for 30 days gets me a novel. And now then my book's 42 chapters long. But then that just means toward the end of my plan, I have to be writing a chapter and a half a day and then 2 chapters a day. So, um, yes, I figured that I knew I needed to create backlist. I knew people, successful authors are writing like 3 or 4, well, some people
Yeah.
write a book a month, which blows my mind. Um,
Yep.
but yeah, I could write one first draft a month, but they'd all be terrible. The people who can write a great first book a month have, my undying admiration. Um, so yeah, I paced, having written those two or book and a half, I sort of knew the pace that I could go at. So I paced it out and I was like, okay, so if we do a developmental edit on the first of this month, then we do a line edit on the first of 2 months later. So I book them on alternating months for developmental edit and line edit. So say, for example, I can't remember what it was, but say January 1st. So January 1st would be a developmental edit. Then if it's in March 1st would be a line edit. Then May would be a developmental edit. Then July would be so I paced them out like that. So
Mm-hmm.
that was how I got them. And I'm just the sort of person that, okay, I've booked an editing slot. I'm going to make it now. It's
Exactly.
got
It
to
seems
happen.
like you're thriving on this. Like you have a deadline, you set it for yourself, or you set it with another person. And so that means that you're going to actually make it.
Yeah. And that's how I do it. I am never without a deadline.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea. I mean, as long as you are not like overexerting yourself and knowing that it's your own deadline, you can be flexible if you have to.
Yeah, but because it's booked with someone else, because I don't want to put that person out, and also
Right.
because Jess's schedule, she is so busy and she has so many clients that if I wanted to move it, it might be like 4 months before I could move it back to it. So
Hmm.
yeah, and I wouldn't want to let anyone down. And and you take a booking from someone as an editor, then you can't take anyone else in that slot. So maybe you're turning people away. And then if I'm like, oh, I'm not going to make that, then I've left them with a hole in the calendar, and I don't want to do that.
Exactly.
So I
Yeah.
sort of feel morally obligated. I'm morally obligated to meet the deadline, but also I want to meet the deadline because then that means another book's done, and I can, I can publish another one. So
Yeah, totally makes sense. And so, related to that, accountability kind of thing. So the stories that you post on Instagram, for the listener out there, every morning around 7 or 7:30 a.m., Nikki posts a story with her drink, whatever she has, which is usually some sort of tea. You don't
yeah,
drink
usually
coffee,
some
huh?
sort of tea. I do. I don't drink caffeine now. That's a
Ah,
new
all
thing.
right.
It's not out of my own choice. I really miss it really badly. But yes, but decaf coffee or some kind of
Right.
herbally tea.
So she always posts a drink and says what she's going to do today. It's usually either a chapter or some piece of editing, something like that. And so you started this because you wanted sort of accountability for yourself, that you promise someone out there that you're going to do it.
Yeah, yeah, even if no one's looking at it, at least I've put it out there what I'm doing for the day. And also, as a reader, I like seeing the author's process of authors that I enjoy. And so I thought maybe if one day there was somebody that liked my books, they might enjoy seeing what I'm doing in the mornings. So yeah,
Well,
50-50.
I'm definitely enjoying seeing
Oh,
those.
thank
And
you.
it also kind of tells me that, yeah, I should be doing something like that. Not exactly like this, but like some sort of accountability. I have a small thing where I like at the end of the month in my wrap up, I put like how many words I've written in the current work in progress. And yeah, it kind of makes me think like even before the end of the month, I'm like, what am I going to put on that slide? I need to kind of write some words.
That's
Something needs to be
fantastic.
done. Yeah, yeah. So it's sort of maybe nobody will see it, but it's kind of a promise to yourself that you are going to
Exactly.
do it. Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah. So you were talking about the author heroes, someone you want to imitate, someone you want to follow, you want to have. Okay, their success sounds a little weird, but like you want to
Yeah,
be
no, I
as
know what you mean.
successful as them. Can you tell us more who they are and
My
why?
author heroes.
Yes,
Well, Tessa Bailey, Tessa Bailey to start with.
obviously. Okay,
She's just amazing and brilliant and smart and hilarious, and her books are fantastic. And yeah,
I agree
just I
completely.
just love every part of her and every part of her existence. I was very fortunate. She came to Toronto earlier this year for the release on the tour for the Fangirl Down release. And I
Hmm.
went to see her be interviewed here, and it was great. And they say not that I didn't meet her because I was too terrified to go up to her at the end, but I just watched her on the stage talk, and people say don't meet your heroes. But she was everything I wanted her to be. She was everything I ever hoped and dreamed she would be. She was just smart and funny and great and relaxed, and just she was amazing. So yeah, so Tessa Bailey, she's trad published though in the indie, although she started off indie, I'm pretty sure.
Oh, she did.
Yeah, I
Okay.
think so. I think so. Um, And in the indie published world, Megan Quinn, Amy Dawes, Pippa Grant. Pippa Grant is like, as an indie author person, Pippa Grant, I feel, is like blazed a trail for spicy rom-coms. Nobody writes a book the way Pippa Grant writes a book. I feel like you could pick up, she's got branding. Her branding is just, you say Pippa Grant, everybody knows what that is, right? You just know what that is. I feel like I could pick up a manuscript with no cover and no name on it and read 2 pages and be like, well, obviously Pippa Grant wrote this because this is
Oh.
bonkers. Nobody writes like that. And I just, I think she's an amazing human with a generous spirit, and has forged a path in the indie publishing world, which is just everything to admire as far as I'm concerned. Yeah.
I've heard her on another podcast, actually, and they were talking about how Pippa Grant is her second pen name, actually. She had another one before. And yeah, to me, it's like it's all new because I have started reading romance maybe a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago. So I had known nothing before. But yeah, it's really inspiring what she was saying.
Yeah, and she picked her name and everything. The name, Pippa Grant name. Well, this is what I'm not saying this because like she's a personal friend of mine. I dream of her being a personal friend of mine. I have heard her talk about it, saying that she picked the name so that she could get the branding, that she could get the branding good. Yeah, I'm good with words. But like, so her weekly newsletter is the Pipster Report. Yeah, and she talks about the Pippaverse, and so like, yeah, and it's so she picked the name, so it was very adaptable in those for those things. And yeah, I think she's a genius. She's a genius writer, a genius marketer, a genius brander, and a genius human, as far as I'm concerned. Yeah.
And so you have the same editor, right? So
Yes.
that's the person you were looking at for the editor. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
All right. Yeah, I've read, I think, only one book so far, but everything else is on my TBR. It's just my TBR is gigantic.
No, surely not.
Oh, of course not. Yeah. I'm just like bored, don't know what to read. I have only like a couple of thousand books on my Kindle. We've talked about how you started. We know how it's going. And I think I told you before, I did have a bit of a question about the genre because, I mean, you identify yourself as a rom-com author. And to me, it was always like I'm reading in different genres and I never really know the difference much. I mean, I know that rom-com is supposed to be romance that is funny, but there are other books that are funny and they're not identified as rom-coms. Like, how do you see a rom-com?
Yeah, so in terms of Pippa Grant, I'll start there. They're very heightened situations, so like a hyper reality. This is what I think. I mean, everybody's going to have like different answers to this question, but I can tell you this is just what I think. So like, Pippa Grant has heightened states of reality. So there's 2 local towns that are warring and have this great rivalry against each other. So it's real, but it also kind of is a heightened state of reality. And I think, as well as the banter being funny and the dialogue being funny, I think the situations are, you can have like, amusing banter in a regular contemporary romance. But I think in a rom-com, you often have like a situation that's funny. So whether that be like one scene where it's like a slapstick scene with somebody, I don't know, slipping on something and their arms are cartwheeling and then they smack someone in the face and that knocks them over and then they bash into something else. And so there can be that, or the general premise of the book. So say office rivals who hate each other but then have to work together on a project. That's more of a rom-com situation, I think. And it's a really interesting question, because when I first started writing this, what I thought I was writing was regular contemporary romance that was slightly amusing. I thought I was going to be writing like Bella Andre type. I thought Bella Andre is, I'm talking of trailblazers in the romance world, Bella Andre, goddess. And so I thought that I'd be writing sort of Bella Andre-esque romances that were just with just a little bit more humor. And I very briefly was in a writing group, not for bad reasons. This makes it sound like then it all went horribly wrong. That's not what happened at all. I was just briefly in a writing group, and I took, on the second week, I think it was, I took the first chapter of That Conflicted Feeling with me. It was the first time I'd read anything to anybody, and I just thought I'd written. I thought what I was writing was, you know, straight contemporary romance with just a touch more humor. And this was a literary. I was embarrassed to start with because this was like a literary writing group of like 8 people who do poetry and literary fiction, and I was like, oh my god. Anyway, so I read the first chapter of that conflicted feeling, and everybody was rolling about laughing. I was like, oh, I didn't think it was that funny. So maybe what I need to do is lean into that and divert and try and knock everything over to be more rom-com. So yeah. So what makes a rom-com? That is a tricky question, but I think possibly the slightly like high concept, I guess. When I say
Right.
hyper reality, like high concept situations. Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, I
It's
think
what I think.
your
Just my
explanation worked perfectly well for me, actually. I kind of think, yeah, so there is a sitcom where on a TV show where the situations are a little ridiculous, a little bit like
yeah.
something that wouldn't happen in real life. And here we have kind of the same situation, which, okay,
Yeah,
yeah,
I think so.
yeah, all right. And so I think I had like a specifically writing question as well for you. Since you're writing rom-coms, you have to write jokes for it, right? There have to be funny situations, but there also have to
Yeah.
be jokes. So how does it go with writing jokes for you? Are you just a natural at it, or it get kind of the first draft also looks not so great joke
Yeah.
wise?
First drafts are always terrible in every regard. Like, there's nothing good about my first draft. Yeah. So I find like in the conversations, um, that sort of comes naturally when in the dialogue. That sort of comes naturally. Coming up with a funny situation is something I do through plotting. I'm like a real ardent plotter and outliner. That's how I work. So like I try to come up with funny situations for the plot to hit. So the dialogue comes up sort of naturally. Oh yeah. So so in that, I'm rambling. In that reunited feeling, where I had a chapter that was set at a funny situation that I came up with, was the couple is accidentally at a bachelorette chocolate making class workshop.
Hmm.
And they were supposed, oh, I've set off a bunch of fireworks behind me in the screen for some reason. I don't know how I did that.
I should find a button to cancel that. I don't understand what it's doing.
Yes, so they booked into a chocolate making workshop, but it's accidentally a bachelorette chocolate making workshop, and everybody else there is part of this bachelorette party, and they're all drunk and making dick jokes. So that was the funny situation that I came up with. But then before I wrote it, I literally made a list of dick jokes. I was like, okay,
Okay.
before I start, let me think of every dick joke I can possibly think of that I can cram into here. And then I was Googling dick jokes, which like is a weird thing to Google. Yes, so I had something that I could, so I had a big long list that I could pull on, which might also be another dick joke, um, to to insert into the chapter. Yeah. So yes. So from a variety of ways. Sometimes the dialogue, a lot of times it comes naturally, or sometimes like I have in the middle of the night. So one conversation came to me in the middle of the night for that fake feeling. Yeah, that's kind of complicated to explain. But there was one conversation in that fake feeling where they come up with the idea that he'd given her some flowers, and he says, "I would never have given you flowers." And she said, "Oh no, they weren't real flowers. They were flowers carved from tomatoes." And he's like, "What are you talking about?" And then they devolved into this conversation that ends up with like, "Well, there was a master tomato carver." That came to me in the middle of the night, and I literally tapped it out without my glasses on in the notes app of my phone. Yeah. So
Yeah, that works actually. I also
yeah.
do that. Not with jokes because I'm not. Even though my writing group will tell you I am funny, but I'm not considering myself like a rom-com
You are
writer or
funny.
anything.
You make me laugh nearly every day. So there you go.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's good to know. So I do come up with a lot of ideas like at 2 a.m. when you need to get your phone quickly and write something down. Or when I'm riding in the car and I talking and I'm like, shut up, let me get my phone just a second. I have an idea.
Absolutely. Yeah, one of the very big things I've learned is don't ever kid yourself into thinking that you'll remember it, because you will not remember it.
I
Always write it
cannot
down.
remember what I wanted when I go up to the room and you want me to remember a whole idea. Like,
Exactly.
seriously, that's
Exactly.
impossible. Yeah, so you mentioned that you are a plotter. So
Yes.
you are outlining and plotting your whole book. Is there a specific
Yes.
technique, a specific method that you're using for plotting?
Yes, well, I started off with this Kathy Yardley's, for this old book here, but
Mm-hmm.
also this is the Bible, man. This is
Right.
for anybody not looking at the video. This is "Romancing the Beat" by Gwen Hayes, um, and this very skinny little book. Like, what is it? It's like the main body of the book is. How many pages does this have? The main body of the book is 78 pages, and the print is big, and there's a lot of white space. It is the greatest because while Kathy Yardley's book made me think, oh, yeah, you can math it out, and that's great. What this book did for me is she splits the book into quarters. And I'd always sort of struggled with the 3-act structure. Like Act Two is 50% of the book. So you got,
Exactly. It's really not a three act. It's the second act always have two parts anyway. So
yeah,
yeah.
exactly. So as soon as that, I was like, oh, 4 quarters. 4 quarters seems so much more manageable. And the way she sets it out with, they meet, and then the second quarter is they fall in love, and then the third quarter is it's all difficult, and then the fourth quarter is you fight for love, and that really helped. But also, I always go back to what I learned from Kathy Yardley, which is actually Deborah somebody else's concept, and I don't recall her surname, but the goal, motivation, and conflict for each character. So I
Mm-hmm.
always start also with my blank pages when I begin. One of them has goal, motivation, and conflict for internal and external for each character. So the female character has goal, motivation, and conflict for her external story, and a goal, motivation, conflict for her internal story, and the male character has the same. And then I have one sheet that has a list of the hook, the inciting incident, pinch point one, midpoint, pinch point two, uh, plot point three, the black moment, and then how it all
Mm-hmm.
resolves. And I start with 2 blank pages with that. That is where I begin, but it ends up as a chapter by chapter outline with bullet points for each chapter, and not necessarily the chapter orders. Not necessarily the right number of chapters is what I'm trying to say.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I'll do just like 25. They're just like 1 to 25, and each number. So they're sort of chapters, but they're not really, because I always end up with like 30 something.
Yeah, I call it a scene, basically. Well, not
Yes.
I call it. I
Yeah.
heard it on another podcast and
Yeah.
another book. It's kind of a scene, and then you can put the chapter breaks wherever you want in between.
Yeah, yeah, that's a very good way of looking at it. Yeah, and then I'll just do bullet points. So I basically have 25 headings, or 26 actually, because then I can divide it into the 4 quarters for
Mm-hmm.
romancing the beat. Yeah, so 1 to 6, 6 to 12, and 12 to 18, and 18 to 24, and then I put bullet points under each of them. And quite often, what I find is that I have the things that I've bullet pointed out are like enough for it's actually 2 chapters worth of stuff, or maybe one bullet point is an entire chapter by itself when I come to write it. So that all varies, but yes, I end up with a chapter by chapter outline. And when I have the chapter by chapter outline, I book a 1 hour call with editor Jess, and I go through that with her, and I do that to try to reduce I fucking hate developmental edit changes. I hate making them. I hate making them more than I just, it's my most hated part of the writing process. Because like you think, oh, I've written this story and I've got it all down. My brain goes, I'm done with that. Thank you very much. And then you get your developmental edit back, and it's like, well, this needs changing. This chapter needs moving there. This person needs, and I'm like, oh my God, I just don't want to do it. So to try to limit that as much as I can, I thought, well, rather than just writing this whole thing out and then giving the whole book to Jess to say, tell me what's wrong with it, if I outline it and go through the outline with her before I start to write it, we can fix some of those things before I've ever written it. So I go through the outline with her, and she's like, well, it won't work. If this is his motivation for that, that's not going to work. Or just some key things that I can then not get wrong. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's still plenty of other things I do wrong when I'm writing it that need fixing in the developmental edit. But I try to limit that.
Mm-hmm.
Or at least give me a better chance at writing a better first draft by going through my outline with my editor before I start writing.
Right. That makes a lot of sense, actually. I don't know if every writer's brain works like that in terms of outlining. I know a lot of people hate it
Oh
and
yeah,
just
absolutely.
hate putting themselves into this box by bullet pointing their
Oh
plot points. But for me, I think the first draft that I've written and now put aside a bit, I didn't have. I had like a very like a summary sort of outline. This happens there, then they go there and whatever. And now that I'm starting to write something else, I am really trying to outline it in like a not the correct way, like a good way that would work for me, and where I could pinpoint things that are wrong or not working before I write them, because I'm not writing every day. So like it can take me a month to write one chapter, and then I have to
Yeah.
erase it just because it's like wrong. It took me a month. It's so much work, and now I have to change that. I don't want to do that. So
Yeah, and that you'll get a system that develops for you. I mean, I'm absolutely not saying that, and I would none of all I can talk about today is what I do. I feel very unqualified to give anybody advice, or but
of
I can say
course.
this is the way I do it, and this is what works for me. And yes, and I think what you will find is you will develop the system that works for you, and that will evolve over time. And I absolutely know there are people who are like, oh my God, I could never, if I've written an outline, that's it. I can't write the story because I feel like I've already written it. So I'm bored with it and I can't possibly write the story. Whereas I'm the opposite of that. And if I were to look at a page that said chapter 3 at the top of it and it was blank and I'd be like, well, what do I do now? I have no idea what to write. But if I've got my list of bullet points, I'm like, oh, this is what goes in chapter 3. Ding, 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 ding. And there we go.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
that's what
I
works for me. And you just got to find what works for you, right? That's the only
exactly.
right thing is the thing that works for you.
Exactly. And then here, my point is also not like to have every author give like a lecture about whatever is
Mm,
available, but just say what is working for them. So maybe someone can relate to the same situation or see, like, oh, my brain works the same way. So this is what I can do, because sometimes you just don't know. Everybody tells you you have to do it this way, that way. And then you're just like, but I can't. But you don't know
yeah.
that there's another author out there that is doing the thing that you could be doing, and it's
Yeah.
going to work for you. Yeah, I think
Absolutely.
that's
I
it.
learned so much from hearing other authors talk about their process and learned so much. Yeah, and it's just you take what you think will work from you and you discard the rest.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's basically why I wanted to start this whole thing, because I've listened to many different podcasts and many different authors, and just sometimes when I hear something and it's not my podcast and I'm not talking to the person, and I just want to, but how explain, please give me more details. So now I get to do that actually.
Yeah, you can ask your own questions, and that's fantastic.
Yeah, exactly. And I think what is interesting to me is a lot of people talk about how they come up with ideas, and then I write the first draft and then I edit it. But then my question is how? What
Ah,
happens in the editing stage? For me, if I were to edit my first draft now, I would probably not even, I would just look at the summary maybe and not meddle with the document that I have. Because when I'm looking at the text that's already written, makes it that much harder for me to change it.
mm-hmm.
It's easier. I heard one writer on a podcast or in a video talking about it, how she has the text like somewhere up, and then she writes thing from scratch. It's a rewrite, kind of. You still know what you're doing, you're making it better, but you're not editing the document that you have, you're writing it from scratch. So
Wow.
that's, I think, what I'm going to do, hopefully, at least. But yeah, I just wanted to know how you do it, how you edit.
Yeah, so right now I'm in the process of in terms of editing, in terms of revising the first draft. Is that what you mean? Yeah.
Yeah, I
So
think that's what I mean.
yeah, so I got to the end of the first draft of the book that I'm writing. Was it last week? Anyway, I got to the end, and then so my process is I write a chapter a day and get through, or one and a half or two when when I'm getting to the end and need to get it done, and then I give myself 2 weeks to go back to the beginning and make it better. So as I am writing, I will leave notes for myself. I write in Google Docs, and I
Hmm.
leave comments for myself in the side of things that I need to come back to. So if I'm on chapter 17 and I'm writing something and I realize, oh, it would be better if this had been casually mentioned in chapter 3, I'll go back to chapter 3 and put a note at the top saying, add the thing about the thing that's going to happen in chapter 17. And so I'll
Hmm.
go back and leave notes for myself for where things need to be added. I will also, and this comes back to the joke thing, this is the thing I was trying to remember in the joke thing and it didn't come into my head. I will sometimes just put XXX for like, this needs to be, that says, if somebody's making a joke about as, oh, he's as angry as and I can't think of anything in the moment, I'll just put an XXX and I'll put a comment like, something that's really angry needs to go here. Or I'll write a joke and I don't think it's funny enough, and I'll put a comment that says this needs to be funnier. Or an XXS that, like, a pun needs to go here, or there needs to be a really funny name for the store here. Just stuff that I don't want to spend 3 hours trying to think of and halt the progress of my first draft. So I leave a bunch of comments. So when I go back to the beginning, I go back to the beginning of that draft. I don't start again. I go back to the beginning of that draft, and I go through the story with the knowledge that I now have from having got to the end of the story. If you see what I mean, I now have the knowledge of that story and how those characters are going to pan out, because I find the characters become clearer to me and clearer on the page as I'm writing the book. So I need to then go back and make them as clear in the beginning as they are at the end. Give them their quirks, or maybe one will develop a habit during the book that I didn't realize he had. I was like, oh yeah, now I need to make sure he has that habit at the beginning. So yes, I go back to the beginning and I revise that draft, and picking up all the things I missed along the way and all my notes along the way, and trying to make it better in all ways, like layering in emotion. Sometimes I can skip over the emotion when I'm just slamming down the first messy draft. So I go back and try and make everything a bit deeper as well on the revision. And that's what I'm doing right now. Sometimes I've set myself a stupid target of getting through 6 chapters a day. I got through 1 chapter yesterday. Sometimes like an entire chapter can be like, oh, but this needs this and this needs this, and then that takes me a whole day. But then sometimes I can, probably usually towards the end of the book, when the first draft of the chapters are better towards the end of the book, because I know what the story is and who the characters are at that point. But yeah, that's my process anyway.
Okay, I see. Yeah, and I see it works best when you do outline. So that way you don't need to really like move much around after you're done with the first draft. You don't need to take a whole chunk out or rewrite the scene completely, which I will probably have to do for that first draft that I have. So yeah, I think that works great. And yeah, I just remembered a thing that I heard from one of the classes that I participated, like an online class. There was an editor there. I unfortunately forgot her name. So the first draft, she said, say what happens. Then the second would be say what you mean. And the third one would be make it pretty. So go around and put some makeup on those words and then make it nice and
That's
lyrical.
great. Yeah, and I heard someone say, was it Neil Gaiman? Some big author that's nothing to do with romance. It might have been Neil Gaiman, or I might be misattributing this. But it was some big famous author said, write the book, then go back through it and make it look like you knew what you were doing.
Exactly, exactly. Because in the beginning, you're like, you don't even know much what's going on. And then you read other books and you're like, how exactly in this first chapter, it was already so clear and so good. That's how, because you go back and you check and you fix.
And you add the stuff that you came up with later. Yeah.
I think one of the things that I'm struggling currently with the new draft that I haven't even started writing, that I'm just brainstorming, is so in romance you always have, well, not a man and a woman, but basically at least two people that are going to get together. So you sort of, whether you're writing one point of view or both or 3 or 5, you kind of need to have an arc for every character, and you need to have motivations and goals and everything for every character. And in romance, what I noticed that it works best when their motivations and especially fears are kind of clashing against each other. So this is something that I'm like, it's hard to come up with the two opposing fears for two people. So is this something that, like, does it take a lot of time for you? How do you come up with these things?
Yeah, that's a really good question and a really good point, because I think one of my, in terms of the story, the setup, the situation, I think that conflicted feeling of the books that I've written has possibly the most successful situation, because the two people, their external desires are absolutely opposite. One wants to build a giant grocery store. The other one has a tiny little produce store that's going to be put out of business if this big grocery giant comes into the street. And so they are absolutely opposed and clashing with each other. And I think, whenever I think about the storylines of the books that I've written, that one always speaks to me as being possibly the most successful setup because of that clash. And as well as that, editor Jess always says to me, in terms of like their arcs that you were just talking about, the character flaws, what are the flaws that each of them have that only the other person will fix? And I find that very difficult too. I find that as a very, but I totally get that if you can come up with that and you can make that work, that makes the story so much better. And I find it very hard to not just have two people being like, oh, I've met you and you're amazing and you complete me. Well, there has to be reasons.
Yeah. I think in regards to this exactly, when I'm trying to think about the two opposing fears or the two clashing fears, I remember what was the Tessa Bailey's, but not the latest. Unfortunately, yours, I think. So there was
Oh,
a
right.
marriage of convenience
Yeah.
between the two people. And so her fear was basically that she is kind of disregarded by her family. They're not including her into things. They don't consider her in business and stuff. And so that's why she goes out on her own and does her own thing because nobody considers her. And so she gets together with this guy and they're in a marriage and everything is great. But his problem is that he needs to do this winery thing that he is doing for his external goal. He needs to do it himself because otherwise it's not real, because he's atoning his sins for that he committed. He thinks
Yeah.
he committed. So he thinks if he lets her in and lets her help, then that's going to kind of invalidate this thing that he's doing. And she's very hurt by this because this is her problem. Nobody's including her in things. And I was listening to this book and I was like, my God, this is genius. Like,
Yeah, that is genius.
their fears are set up in a way that they're kind of hurting each other with them,
Yeah.
but also get to overcome them. That's the thing that I'm trying to achieve.
Yeah, she's Tessa Bailey is goals in all regards, as far as I'm concerned. Yeah, and that's exactly it. And I don't even know how you go about coming up with that. Whether you sit with a blank page and try and come up with ideas and brainstorm ideas, or if that then comes out organically. I don't know. And
Yeah.
then you go back and fix it and make it look like you knew what you were doing. That's perfect, right? What you just said there is a perfect example of doing it brilliantly.
So if we're talking about writing advice, so what would be the best and the worst piece of writing advice that you ever got?
There's a not advice that was given personally to me, but I remember seeing an ad for, the masterclasses, that the actual masterclass that has like Serena
Uh-huh.
Williams teaching you how to play tennis and Gordon Ramsay teaching you how to cook, and they have a bunch of authors on there too.
I only see the ones for writing for some
Yeah, there
reason.
you go. It knows you too well.
Yep.
I remember seeing it. Yeah, I was also served these ads for when Dan Brown was doing one, and in his clip, in the ad for his masterclass, he said something genius, which was write like no one's watching, because no one's watching. And I was like, that is genius. And so now when anybody says to me, oh, I really want to write when I'm scared, I was like, Dan Brown, I heard him say once, write like no one's watching, because no one's watching. And they're not. Literally nobody ever has to see it. Nobody ever, ever, ever has to see it. And I think that is a genius piece of advice. Also, the 4 acts in Romancing the Beat changed my life, made me think I could actually do it.
See, like, yeah, just like something out of nowhere can just click in your brain and you'll be like, wow, okay, my whole life is now much better
Yes,
because of
yes,
that.
exactly.
Well, if you could, what advice would you give yourself maybe back 4 or 5 years when you were just starting? Would you change anything?
I would tell myself to stop worrying so much about not having published these books, because publishing them later might end up actually being better. Because I was worried about it. Because all I was doing was spending money, right? I'm an editing. I'm addicted to editing, and well, I do all the editing, right? I do developmental, line edit, copy edit, proofread. I do every one, because I feel like I need that support and I need that editing, and that I feel like that's what I personally need. I know a lot of people don't want to do any editing, a lot of with an editor, don't want to work with an editor, and a lot of people don't want to spend that amount of time on one book. But for me, just me personally, I want all that editing, and I feel that's what I need to make the best book that I can have. And of course, every edit costs money. I
Right.
had covers made, which cost money. So for 4 years there, I was doing nothing but spending money. And it was a great hobby. And I would tell myself, well, even if this comes to nothing, it's just a hobby. And actually, I feel like it's a lot of money, but a lot of people spend a lot more money on their hobby than I'm spending on this.
That's
So
true.
yeah, if you play golf or you go skiing or whatever, or I don't know,
Yeah. I
it,
wanted to learn tennis and then I realized how much money you need. And I was like, no, no,
crazy,
thank you.
yeah. So I worried a lot for those 4 years that I was just building myself an expensive hobby that was never going to come to anything. And I would tell myself to stop worrying about that. Just write the best books that you can, and you will actually be pleased when you've written the sixth one. You'll be pleased when you go back to look at the first one that you can actually change it before you put it out.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's a real fear for. It's a bit irrational because, like, well, once you haven't published yet, so why really hurry? Nothing's gonna disappear. Even though I watched a video yesterday that was saying that in 10 to 20 years, we're going to all burn burn to death. Basically, yeah, that was
Okay.
the video. It really scared me. I got a little freaked out for like an hour, but yeah. So yeah, maybe there is some hurry, but like there is not much
Just the
hurry.
Armageddon hurry, that's all.
Yeah, the publishing's not gonna go anywhere. It's gonna
No.
change. It's gonna, but you're gonna adapt. And I think the first months I am getting a bit obsessed with each new hobby. So like I started writing and I started freaking out that I'm not fast enough and I need to write more and I need to quit my job. Huh? Can you imagine? I need to quit my job, which gives me all the money and all the comfortable life that I have now.
Yeah.
I need to quit my job and start writing full time. And this is ridiculous. It's a lot of people are doing the same thing I'm doing and they're writing more than me. And it's just, yeah, I think it's a great advice just to chill and to worry less.
And have that as a goal, right? I mean, that's my goal too, is to be able to do it full time. I mean, I have a full time job, and I just and also not only did I have a full time do I have a full time job, but during those 4 years, actually for 6 years, I only stopped doing this in March. I had a weekend job too.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and that was my book money. And I quit that in March because I was on the cusp of the books starting to pay for themselves. Um, and I was really pissed off with it, and I was tired all the time. But that extra money from the weekend job made a big difference, and it meant that I could do that for 4 years.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
that
It's
gave me
it.
that.
Yeah, it's important to see it in perspective. Yes, you want to write full time. Yes, you want to be successful writer. You want to have more time. But then, yeah, I couldn't probably say no to my job because I mean, not only it is fulfilling, but I chose the right profession. So,
That's great. It's an amazing thing to be able to say.
yeah,
There
I got to
aren't that many
travel.
people.
I got to travel a lot. I have great colleagues. I have a lot of education. I can do conferences. I can do a lot of things. So yeah, I really shouldn't be complaining about my full-time job. But
That's fine, but you can have a goal to give it up. There's nothing wrong with having a goal to stop it. I have a goal to stop mine, and I love my job too. So
exactly.
goals are good.
Yeah. So one of the last questions was about the like book and podcast recommendations, but you've already provided, I think, two craft book recommendations. Can you just remind me the author of the first book?
Yeah,
So,
Kathy Yardley.
okay,
Kathy Yardley. I think her updated version of this is called "Rock Your Plot." I think
rock
is
your
what
plot. Okay.
is what it called. She's about to put out a course, I think, for that, which makes it sound like I'm plugging her and paying her. I'm not.
Well, you can. Why not?
She's a plotting genius, as far as I'm concerned. And yeah, I'm romancing the beat by Gwen Hayes. So
Yes, for Romancing the Beat, I can vouch myself. I've read
yeah,
that. It was really easy to understand. It did seem a bit formulaic, but honestly, if you know the formula, we can play. You can play with it.
yeah, you
Like
can do
it's
anything within it. All you need is like the tent poles, and then you can hang whatever you
yeah,
like off
yeah. You
them.
can break all the rules you want as long
Yeah,
as you know them. So yeah,
exactly.
that's exactly the case. All right. Well, we've been talking for more than an hour
Oh
already.
gosh,
That's like I
I
didn't
can
even
talk to you
expect
all
it.
day.
I was just going to ask you about ARC readers because I know a
Oh,
lot of new authors are searching for ARC readers, and I see different types of process that that authors go through. So a lot of authors are doing that through the PR companies, which is a great idea. If you don't want to handle it yourself, just hand it off to a PR company and they will do the sign up sheet and everything, and they will give out the arcs. And that's a great option. A lot of authors do that themselves. So they have the Google form or something for them. And then there is what you did. I don't know if you had a form out, but basically how we've met was that you contacted me on Instagram and you asked me to read your book. And I think actually, I think it was from a reel or something that I replied to, and I was excited that your book had a dog in it. And I was like, oh my God, a deaf dog. I really,
That
really
was
want to read
exactly what it
this.
was. I'd forgotten
Yeah.
what our first contact was. I remember that it was organic, that I didn't reach out cold because I was too scared at that point to reach out cold to anybody. But I remember it was like fairly organic. Yes, it was the dog. It was Elsa in that
Yeah,
Stranger
it
Things.
was. Yeah, there was a reel or a post, and there was a mention of the dog. And I really, really love dogs anywhere, like in books or in real life. So I said like, I wish I could read it, but I don't have time. I really never have time. Then you reached out and you said, okay, you can read it later. It's all right. And then I think I eventually made it to the publication date actually.
Yeah.
But my point here is that when an author approaches me and creates a personal connection and just not something generic, I think we just genuinely talked.
Yeah. We did. It
And
was very organic.
yeah, and this is really underrated way to find art readers. Maybe you won't find 100, but you won't find will find people who will actually read and review your book. Because when you find 100, there will maybe be 10 of them that will actually review your book. So yeah, just don't be afraid to reach out to people and just look at their profile a little bit, see what they're doing,
Absolutely.
find a little fact that you like or something, and then you will create readers that will stay with you probably for a long time. I'm the proof of that. I mean, not only the books are great, but honestly, I think I talk to you not every day, but every week probably.
Yes, it's
So
certainly very regular. Yeah, I've loved it. This is one of my, and I sometimes think, if I hadn't been on Instagram, I never would have met you. I certainly wouldn't be sitting here now. And you bring such joy, and you're so smart and brilliant, and I just enjoy your Instagram company very much.
yeah, the same, exactly. That was one of the things that I really was thinking while having this idea of creating a podcast, because I am asking you so many questions and you're always like replying either by email or on Instagram with like a lot of advice and a lot of links and, oh, you want to check that out or that book or this one. People should really share this kind of information, and it's really should be more widespread, because all I see is more of like generic advice, and it's nice to have something personal.
Absolutely. I think it's fantastic. And I think it's a brilliant idea. I know before I was publishing and while I was writing the first books and not publishing, and I listen to podcasts all the time. And even still now, my favorite ones are interviews with authors talking about how they do what they do. That's my favorite thing to listen to. So, and I sort of thought I would never be one of those authors on a podcast talking about how they do what they do. So thank you for making me that.
I will. I think it's just the beginning for you. There's gonna be more podcasts, and yeah, you recommended me one of your friends, right? Who also has a podcast, Jamie Albright. So I've been listening
Yes.
to her as well, and yeah, she's kind of interviewing a lot of the same people that are with your editor, and so I'm also thinking about reaching out to them as well.
Yeah, I wish Jamie Albright was my friend. She's one of my dream friends. She's one of my pretend friends. She doesn't know she's my friend, but I love her. And also, she's a rom-com author who's great, who also started writing later in life, and just has been brilliant at it, and is an amazing human as well. So she's another one. I missed her off my hero list earlier, but she was a big inspiration. And here's the thing that I heard Jamie Albright say a long time ago, and maybe this should have come under inspiration, but it's not particularly about writing. And I think about it whenever I'm like, oh my God, I can't do it. I've heard her say several times, the only way you fail is if you give up.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's kept me going on a number of occasions. So she's brilliant.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, I really don't have any scenario for like the end of the episode. I think we're gonna come up with that at some point, and I really think we didn't cover everything. So I am hoping to see you on more episodes.
Anytime you like.
Yeah, anytime you want to discuss anything, we can do deep dives. We can talk about more about your books. I'm super excited for the new series. Is it all? It's all going to be about soccer, or it's just?
Um, the first one is very soccer based, and then the four books, because it's about the soccer player.
Hmm.
And then the other four books in that series are about the owners of the soccer team. And it's
Okay.
the second book, there's what I'm writing right now that I'm now revising the crappy draft for. And there is very little soccer in that, if any. But the club is sort of in the background of the story.
Hmm.
But yeah, so they will have varying amounts of soccer in them. The first one is very soccer based because it's about the soccer player who becomes the coach, the disgraced British soccer hero who becomes a coach of a terrible, the worst team in the US MLS.
That sounds so much like Roy Kent to me.
Yeah,
I'm
there you
just
go.
so
And he has to
excited.
redeem himself and he has to redeem the team, and we all redeem each other in the process. So, yeah.
That sounds amazing. All right. So, yeah, what I forgot is where can my listeners find you?
Oh, yes. So my website is nickyredford.com, and Nicky is spelled Nicky, nickyredford.com. And Instagram is my main social media, which is at Nicky Redford Author. I'm also Facebook at Nicky Redford Author and TikTok at Nicky Redford
Oh,
Author.
you're on
But
Facebook.
yes, just a page. I need to get a group because that's where you get, you nurture your readers in a group, but I just don't have time in my life to give myself properly to a group. And I would hate to start a group and then not be able to do it properly and for people to just think, oh, she doesn't give a damn.
Yeah,
So
that's
I
right.
haven't
That's right.
started it for that reason yet.
You just
But
stick with what you can do, right?
yeah,
That's
so
that's
that's all you
great.
can only do what you can do. So yeah, nickyredford.com and at Nicky Redford Author on socials.
All right. I'll put everything in the show notes, of course. Thank you so much for coming, and I can't wait to have you on my show again. And have a good day.
Thank you. You too. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm honored to be the first guest, and I know that you're going to make an awesome podcast series. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. If you like what you hear so far, please consider subscribing and tune in for the next episode. If you have burning questions about writing you'd like to have answered, head to my Instagram page at kkalbabooks and leave me a message. Or use my email k.k.alba.books@gmail.com. If you'd like your favorite author to answer your question on my show, again, head to my Instagram or email me to let me know which author you'd like me to invite, and I'll try to get over my anxiety and do it. On the other hand, if you're an author who's published at least one book, traditional or indie, and you'd like to become a guest, well, you know what to do by now. Message me and let's get to know each other.